Hey everybody, welcome back. I want to talk about section 1.6 in your textbook on this video. The section is called Extended Arguments, and that's a fine name for the chapter, but I actually think the most important information in this chapter is the technique of diagramming arguments. And so that's really what I want to focus on right now. Now, it's not wrong to talk about this section in terms of extended arguments, because the thing that comes out in this section is that within a single argument, some statements can function both as premises and as conclusions. And that's something that we haven't really faced in the previous section. So let me tell you what I mean by that. So we've said that arguments are made up of statements, some of which support others. And those that are offered as support are premises, and those which are supported are conclusions. All of that's true. But arguments often are extended, right? That's why this is called extended arguments. Sometimes you offer evidence for one thing, and then that thing, which has functioned as a conclusion in the first part of your argument, becomes the premise for something else. And so that statement operates both as a conclusion because it's supported by the first premise, and as a premise for some subsequent conclusion. So, for example, if you look in section 1.6, they give this argument about the selling of human organs. Logic textbooks love to give kind of unsettling examples. I don't know what the deal with that is. But here's the example that they give. You can read along with me. I don't need to put it on the board. It's exactly the same example that's in your book. So just open it up and take a look. But the argument goes like this. The selling of human organs, such as heart, kidneys, corneas, should be outlawed. Allowing human organs to be sold will inevitably lead to a situation in which only the rich will be able to afford transplants. This is so because whenever something scarce is bought and sold as a commodity, the price always goes up. The law of supply and demand requires it. So, the way that they've divided this up in the book is into 4 statements. The first one is the selling of human organs, etc., should be outlawed. And they call that number 1. And whenever you're diagramming, if you think you know what the conclusion is, put it at the bottom. It doesn't have, you can number it however you want to number it. In fact, as you go through the passage, you'll probably want to number it in order, and it just happens that in this case the conclusion is the first one. But if you're diagramming, which is a very useful technique, always try to put your conclusion at the bottom. That's just kind of how diagramming works. And if you get it wrong, then rearrange. But number things and then try to get your conclusion at the bottom. So here, the selling of human organs should be outlawed. That's the conclusion. So if you're looking for a premise, you're looking for a statement that is made in support of that statement. Well, in this example, it's very easy. It's the very next one. And it is, allowing human organs to be sold will inevitably lead to a situation in which only the rich will be able to afford transplants. So that they call number 2. And here's the key. When you have statement number 2 offered as a reason to believe or support for statement number 1 in a diagram, you put an arrow. And all that means is statement number 2 supports statement number 1. Statement number 2 is functioning as a premise. Statement number 1 is functioning as a conclusion. In this example, though, it goes on, and we get statement number 3. This is so because whenever something scarce is bought and sold as a commodity, the price always goes up. Okay? And what we have here is when something is bought and sold as a commodity, the price goes up. Therefore, we're going to develop a situation of haves and have-nots. Therefore, the selling of organs should be outlawed. And here, the arrow means that this statement is presented as evidence for that statement, And that statement is presented as evidence for that statement. And you have the numbers in the text. When you're doing outlines, you always put your numbers in the text just to keep things clean. And in this one, you get one more. The law of supply and demand demands it. So you have a 4. Now look at the way this works, right? Here you have a conclusion, that's clear enough, and you have a premise that supports it. But this premise is in fact also a conclusion that's supported by this premise. And this premise is also a conclusion that's supported by that premise. So what you learn in an extended argument is that statements in the same argument can function both as premises or conclusions. And when you have this happening in this particular way, you're going to call it an extended argument. That's important. That's good. I hope you understand that. But I also hope that you can see how this diagramming thing works. That is, that statements get numbered, and you put the number in a circle just to keep it clear. And then you use arrows to designate how these different statements are related to each other in the argument. In this case, you have each of these statements offering evidence for the subsequent statement in this kind of direct line. And when you have statements that operate like this, premises that operate independently like this, you call them independent premises. That's not the only way that an argument can work, so we have to get a little bit more sophisticated with our diagramming techniques. So look at the next example. They call this one a vertical pattern. They call the next one a horizontal pattern. And in the horizontal pattern, all of the premises are still independent. That is, they stand alone. They don't need anything else in order to offer support for the conclusion. But rather than operating in a line, they operate kind of separately from one another. Right? So this is another organ selling example. I won't read it to you out loud. You can look at it. But basically what you're looking for when you have this shape is that each of these arguments, because they all are arguments, you have a premise supporting a conclusion, and the argument has a kind of a more stable strength, because even if you could refute one of these, the others would continue to stand and support the conclusion. In the vertical organization, if any one of the links of the chain turns out to be repudiated, the whole argument falls apart. But if you have these sort of independent, vertically arranged statements or premises, you have a kind of a solid argument to lean on. 2 more building blocks of diagramming, though. The next one is called conjoint premises. And I will read this example to you so you can see how it works. But again, we have 2 premises that support a conclusion. And they look like they're vertical, so it looks the same. But in a conjoint structure, the premises need each other in order to support the conclusion. So we represent this by bracketing them together before we let them support it. See the difference? In the vertical, there's no bracket, right? Each of these independently support the conclusion. And if one of these turns out to be false or wrong, the others remain. Whereas in a conjoint structure, if it turned out that one or the other of these were false or inadmissible for whatever reason, the other one would no longer function as support. So let's look at their example. This is again in section 1.6. Getting poor people off the welfare rolls requires that we modify their behavior patterns. The vast majority of people on welfare are high school dropouts, single parents, or people who abuse alcohol and drugs. These behavior patterns frustrate any desire poor people may have to get a job and improve their condition in life. Again, these arguments, they love to like push buttons, but the idea is, if the conclusion is we need to change behavior patterns, one of the premises is about the behavior patterns, and the other is kind of what we need to do about it. If one of these is not true, that is, if these strategies for changing behavior aren't well taken, then it's totally irrelevant that people have these behavior patterns. Likewise, if they don't have these behavior patterns, then it's totally irrelevant whether those strategies are decent strategies or not. In order for the argument to work, both of these things have to be true, and if one of them is not true, then neither of them offer support to the conclusion. That's the deal with conjoint ones. Last structure, 404, is really easy. It's kind of an inversion of the conjoint one. And in this case, you have a premise, let's use the numbers here, that supports multiple conclusions. The example at the bottom of 66, you guys can read it for yourself. I don't need to read all these to you. But the point is that when you're doing an argument, it's probably more likely that you're going to see multiple premises for a conclusion, but that's not necessary. You can have one premise that supports many conclusions. Okay, now these are the building blocks of analyzing arguments, of diagramming arguments. They're really, really useful. Knowing that you can, figuring out how when you read something to isolate the statements, that's a little bit more complicated than you might think until you try it, but you're going to have homework to do and you'll try it for yourself. But isolating statements, being able to put numbers by them, recognizing the way they relate to each other, what is offered as support for what else, and being able to display that graphically. Logic is all about organizing your mind, organizing your thoughts, and this is one of the first techniques that we've had this semester. There are going to be others that display in an organized way the relationship between ideas. Logic does that a lot. It works to display the relationships between ideas. And this is a very intuitive, powerful technique for looking at prose, looking at language, and moving it into a structure where you can really see what's going on logically. Once you have these building blocks, statements, arrows indicating what supports what, either leaving them independent to indicate that they can stand on their own as premises, or conjoining them to indicate that they need each other to be premises. Recognizing whether your conclusion is multiple or singular. Once you have these building blocks, you can build huge diagrams. And in fact, the rest of the chapter, the rest of the section 1.6, you'll see building huge diagrams. Don't let these intimidate you. Once you have the building blocks, once you sort of go one step at a time to find the statements and think about how they're related to each other, these diagramming trees just sort of build. And when they do, you can actually see the relationships of ideas. It takes practice. All of this stuff in this course takes a ton of practice. So do a lot of homework, work on a lot of diagrams, check the answer keys in the homework site to see what you're doing well and poorly. Talk to me if you're having trouble. But honestly, if you understand the basics of diagramming and then you give it some time and some practice, you're going to get this. And it's really the first moment in this course that you're really doing logic, that you're really looking at the structure of arguments and statements and ideas and seeing the way that they're related. So if you have trouble, do what you're supposed to do. Talk to your group, talk to me, but give it some time, give it some practice, and see how it comes out for you.